As Ezekiel Elliott said today, the Eagles showing the most interest. Also a report out there that Ryan Matthews has a couple suitors. We'll break it down with John here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Don't forget, John will be live with me on draft day, Thursday, at Tailgaters in Galloway, John. And a lot of news and notes today. Let's start with Ezekiel Elliott. He's doing the car wash today over at ESPN, and I guess some people are getting the indication that he feels that the Eagles are giving him the most love.
Yeah, well, he feels that way. So he was asked basically who's shown the most interest, and he came up with Philadelphia. So, obviously, I mean, the Eagles are doing their due diligence. But by what we saw unfold yesterday, we all know what Plan A is, and Plan A was to go get the quarterback. So that doesn't necessarily mean they don't have interest in Elliott, because they have to put Plan B, Plan C, Plan D in the hopper, and he could be in that conversation if things don't break the way they want them to. If some reason the St. Louis, Los Angeles Rams, I always say Saints Point, if they decide Jared Goff is the number one overall pick, at least a chance we're still talking about Eagles trying to move up to number 2, especially if Cleveland's not sold on Carson Wentz.
Right. So, I we'll get to that in a second, too, because obviously there's a lot there. But Elliott basically says he believes he's in play for the Eagles at 8, and he has gone so far to say that he won't go visit teams past 13, which is where the Eagles were before. But Scott Wright said something interesting with us about an hour ago, John, when he basically said that he wouldn't be surprised if someone leaps the Eagles to go get Elliott. Would that be a good thing?
Yeah, I think it would. I do, because you know me, and I'm in the camp that doesn't believe you should take a running back at the number 8 overall pick. And the best example I can give is Adrian Peterson, because if you talk to most people in this league, that's probably the best pure runner since Jim Brown. That's how good Adrian Peterson is. Ezekiel Elliott's not going to be Adrian Peterson. The hope is he can be a very good NFL running back. But the reason I brought that up is think about where the Minnesota Vikings have been with Adrian Peterson, who's been as advertised, who's won an MVP with Kristen Ponder playing quarterback. The point I'm trying to make is that team has made a couple playoff runs here and there, but they've never been a significant contender. Why? Because they've never solved the issue at the quarterback position. They hope they have it now in Teddy Bridgewater. We'll see how that shakes out. The running back position is just not enough value when you're sitting at number 8 overall. So I think if the Eagles are going to make that decision, if they're forced to stay in that spot and they want to take Ezekiel Elliott, I think that's a mistake.
Well, then how much does this report that suggests that Dallas and San Francisco are interested in Ryan Matthews? I mean, if the Eagles were to deal Matthews, doesn't Elliott now make a lot more sense?
Well, I don't think they have much confidence in Ryan Matthews, and I think that goes back to another Chip Kelly pickup that Howie Roseman's not necessarily enamored with. So it's not the point that the Eagles don't need a running back. They certainly do. Even if they don't trade Ryan Matthews, they need to add to their running back courts.
But I agree with that. I agree with that. If they have Matthews, they still need a running back. But you don't need one in the first round. But if you lose Matthews, don't you need a higher profile guy?
I mean, to make the fan base feel better, probably. But we've seen it. You saw when Marshawn Lynch went down in Seattle. You saw when Jamal Charles went down in Kansas City. High-profile guys weren't replacing them, and those teams succeeded, and they succeeded to a high degree. So I think it's been proven time and time again you can get at least competent running backs later in the draft. And I think the Eagles will be able to do that and will do that, whether it's the third round, the fourth round, or even later. You take a look at the kid who replaced Lynch in Seattle. He was undrafted. Wasn't even taken in the draft. So the position is just not valuable enough to waste the number 8 overall pick. we constantly talk about the Eagles moving up to get a quarterback, and the thought process behind that, think about it, Mike, is you don't want to be in the top 10 that often. So when you're there, you might as well go for it and try to get the franchise-changing quarterback. That same mentality, if you spin it off to the running back position, if you're in the top 10 in this draft, you have to take it on a more valuable position. And whether it's left tackle or a guy who projects to left tackle down the line, whether it's a pass rusher, whether it's a lockdown corner, those are more valuable positions in today's NFL.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN. We talked yesterday about the possibility of 4 quarterbacks going. At this point right now, though, would Philadelphia make the most sense moving up to number 2 and just taking who's ever left over and basically not waiting to see who's there at number 8? And if there's a guy there at number 8, say Lynch, and they can't move around, do they just say, you know what, we can't move, we want a quarterback that bad, we'll take a guy at 8?
I think it's a possibility they take a Paxton Lynch at number 8, but I think it's a slight possibility. I think it all depends. The first scenario you said, it all depends on how much they like Jared Goff, because we know they like Carson Wentz. I've got that from a number of sources. That's Doug Peterson's guy. That's the guy they want. So, again, if the Rams go in the Goff direction and all of a sudden Wentz is sitting there at number 2, then it's much more likely that the Eagles will do everything possible to try to move up. Might not even mean anything, because the Cleveland Browns still need a quarterback. But if it's in the possibility and Cleveland opens up discussions, I think the Eagles will try to make the move up. If it goes the other way and Wentz is taken by the Rams, I'm not sure the Eagles feel that same way about Goff. Not to say they don't. I just don't have that from sources definitively. So I don't know if they feel the same way about Jared Goff as they do about Carson Wentz.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. How much has the trade by the Rams changed the potential for 8?
I think it's changed it quite a bit, simply because you have a really, really good player in Tunsil that's now going to drop. That's going to have a domino effect. And I think if you have a run on quarterbacks, that has a domino effect in the other direction, in the fact that it's going to push Paxton Lynch up the board. It's going to push Connor Cook up the board. I think we always talk about there's going to be 3, possibly 4 first-round picks. I think all of a sudden, if Paxton Lynch goes in the top 10, then there's no doubt that Connor Cook is going to be a first-round pick. So there's a lot of dominoes, and the linchpin is going to be Cleveland at number 2 and what they decide to do. If they're willing to take the loser of the battle for the Rams affection, so to speak, then I think all of a sudden all heck breaks loose, because everybody who's looking for a quarterback could be, and think about all the teams, could be the Dallas Cowboys, could be the San Francisco 49ers, could be the Eagles, even the Denver Broncos, New York Jets, New Orleans Saints, teams down in the draft, desperately in need of young quarterbacks. It's supply and demand. And as usual, when it comes to the quarterback position in this league, the supply isn't as big as the demand.
John, we talk about Vernon Hargreaves. Scott Wright was on with us earlier, said he's a top 10 talent. He makes a lot of sense. He mentioned Joey Bosa, Miles Jack, who you've said many times you think he's number 1 on the Eagles board. Those 3 guys, with this trade up, does that it filters guys like that potentially falling to you now as well? 8 seems like a spot that really, the fact that they were able to go from 13 to 8 really has changed the dynamic for them.
Sure, and that's the one thing Howie's always said, is he thinks this is a 10-person draft as far as the top-level prospects in this draft. It kind of falls off from 10 to 11. So it was very important for them to get into the top 10. Even if they don't get the quarterback, all of a sudden they know they're going to get one of those difference-making players if they just sit there. It's just a matter of who falls to them and how the board kind of it develops. And when I always say, I have to clarify this, when I always say Miles Jack is number one on the Eagles board. What I mean is the Eagles have him rated as the best football player in this draft, and that hasn't changed. But clearly this team believes that to move forward, because of the value of the position, that Carson Wentz is the most important player in this draft.
John, I do want to get your thoughts on the schedule, not in terms of wins and losses. It's April. It's kind of hard to go through that, and I know just the setup of it with the couple primetime games. But I saw the run that I think is interesting is twice in this season, 3 out of 4 weeks you're playing division foes, 3 straight times on the road, and then closing out with those 3 teams in 4 weeks at home. I thought that was a pretty interesting stretch, plus the bye week early in the year. What was your impressions on the schedule?
Yeah, you never liked it when your bye week is that early, and I think it's week 4 for the Eagles, so that's not going to be that helpful. You'd prefer to have that later in the year. But what is going to be really helpful is if they can keep their head above water. Basically, you mentioned all those division games in December at home. So those Week 16, Week 17 division games are going to be at Lincoln Financial Field, and if they're in a position to take that division by winning those final 2 games, for instance, that's a huge advantage to be playing in Philadelphia that late in the season. Week 17 would be on New Year's Day. The concern is right in the middle of that schedule, I think it's 4 out of 5 on the road, and the 1 game you have at home is a really good Minnesota team. That's where you got to look at for the hiccup. But if they can weather the storm and be in a position to be relevant in the division when December 1st comes around, they're going to be in good shape.
Yeah, those division games at the end of the year, they are home. They play Washington at home, then Baltimore on the road, and then New York and Dallas at home to close out the year. They do play Seattle on the road, and that was because of that win they got over the Giants last year. You start to think about that now and say, does playing at Seattle in November really sound like a fun time instead of playing the Rams, who are going to have a rookie quarterback?
Yeah, and really it's now with the Chip Kelly tradition, the Week 17 win over the Giants that hurts you long term, not only in the draft, but also as far as the schedule maker. So anytime you win a meaningless football game, it doesn't help. But this isn't basketball. There really isn't any tanking in the NFL. Even for as much as I've criticized Chip Kelly, I don't blame him for that, because the NFL sets up the schedule. This is the 7th straight year, I believe, that every single Week 17 game is a divisional game, and they do that on purpose because those games are generally more meaningful to teams. And even if you aren't in the playoff hunt that late, you don't want to lose to your rivals. It's just not the way football works, and that has really curbed the minimum tanking that there was in the NFL. It's really kind of eliminated it.
Yeah, and last thing on the schedule, opening up at home against Cleveland, you got to feel pretty confident that you're going to get off on the right foot.
Yeah, I mean, you can't ask for a better opponent to get the Doug Peterson era off with a bang. And there's 2 ways to look at it. That's a game. Obviously, it's a home game against the Cleveland Browns. New coach, new general manager, new front office, reboot again. They might, whether it's going to be Robert Griffin III or a rookie, they're going to have a new quarterback. That's a perfect situation to win Week 1, and you should win going away. The problem is if you struggle and somehow lose that game, then what does that tell you the 2016 season is going to be like?
Well, it was similar to what you felt last year losing to Atlanta when most people just took that game for granted. Now, Atlanta turned out to be a decent team, not a playoff team, but I don't think anybody's looking at Cleveland. But, hey, Hugh Jackson, they might have the second pick in the draft. Maybe their fortunes are finally changing down there. We'll see. 2 rookie coaches will face off at the link, Hugh Jackson and Doug Peterson, to start things off. 97.3 ESPN. We'll have that game, of course, right here on 97.3. We got another chance for you to qualify coming up. The draft is on the way. John and I will have plenty more leading up to the draft on Monday's show. John, we will talk to you then, pal.
Hey, thanks. Have a good weekend, Mike.